Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Servant Aftershow, which is being presented by the Hollywood Critics Association. My name is Heather Wixson, and for this week, we are going to be diving into episode 3 of Servant, which is entitled Hair. For this week's episode, of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Rick Hong, and we are thrilled to be joined by Kit Bowen. Hello, Kits.
Hi, how are you guys doing? I'm happy to be here, man. This show is really weird, and I love it.
I think that's like the sentiment in everybody who comes in. We're like, we don't know what's going on. This thing is crazy. It's a roller coaster. We're just here for the ride. So we appreciate you being here to chat about everything that we've seen so far.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I usually do a lot of chit chat at the beginning, but I'm going to turn it over to both of you guys because this is the third episode of this season. For me, what I really appreciated about this episode in particular is there's a lot of good character stuff that I feel like builds on these characters' lives, both past and present, in some really subtle ways. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what both of you thought about this episode.
Well, when it comes to this episode, we've seen, this episode, we've seen, the entrance of Sunitha Mani, from like a couple episodes ago. And she's only had a few bit lines in here as kind of like the new love interest girlfriend to Julian. And here, the beginning, we kind of actually get some backstory on her, having some dialogue and talking about who she is and some of her thoughts on Leanne and how she kind of goes into the psychosis of what Julian's kind of suspecting and thinking about. So that's key. And, I look at this episode as the beginning half is or the beginning portion, as we saw as we opened up on it, is the kind of the paranoia of Julian. And then it kind of switches back a little bit towards the end as we get there back to kind of Leanne's big worry for this season, or how we open up, or how we left season 2 and entered season 3.
How about for you, Kit?
Yeah, I mean, I actually really like this episode because we're finally getting to we're finally just trying to understand who this baby is, and where it came from. And and Julian's, he's the only one who's kind of being rational about it all. I mean, I know that the husband or whatever, he's just playing along with it because he wants to make sure his wife doesn't go, bonko again. But Julian's just showing that horrible scene where he sees the baby, and you're like, oh God. And, we know what happened. So who is this baby? So his, sleuthing, basically trying to figure out who this baby is, if indeed it is, it could be Jericho, revived, I guess. I don't know. That's the whole part about this that thrills me, is that, is it supernatural? Did she bring the baby back to life? What is the situation with this kid? But Julian's being rational about it and saying it can't be your kid. It's got to be somebody else's kid. It must be Leanne's kid. So I really liked how it kind of dived deep into that, because it continually bothers me. It's like, hello, don't we know what actually happened to the kid? It's like, no, what is going on? How did they bring it back? Also, the other part I love about this show is the foodie part. I don't know if you guys talked about this yet or not, but I love the idea that this guy just makes these outrageously, intricate and really exotic kind of food. And, the idea he's bringing it to these, these homeless kids in the park in the back, the backyard kind of thing across the way, making them that pizza thing. I thought that was so funny. It's like, oh, this is a pizza with, I've forgotten all the ingredients on it. They're like, okay, yeah. And they're picking up all the weird stuff. And I just love that it's a foodie show at the same time through, I'm forgetting the character's name. What's the husband's name?
Sean. Toby Kebbell. Yeah. It's interesting because we open up and you're like, you watch that opening scene, you're like, man, I'm not hungry at all. And you're just kind of that's gross. And, Julian's throwing up and everything. And then, you get towards the middle and stuff. And all of a sudden you're like, maybe my appetite is back.
Yeah, I could go for some pizza right now.
Yeah.
Right. Some pizza and wine. Yeah, exactly. Just some pizza and wine. And yeah.
Yeah. I love that it's a foodie show. Yeah. It's great.
I would even be inclined to try dandelion soup, which I've never in my life ever been inclined to try. But I was looking at the way it gets plated, because we watch a lot of food shows. So of course I'm like, when you watch a few of those, you think like you're like this expert. And you're like, oh, the plating is beautiful. He puts the little delicate flour in. But it was like, I'm like, I would try that. Like it looked really delicious. And it was interesting too, because that was, if you think about sort of Leanne and her rituals, like she always eats her can of tomato soup. And in this episode, we see her opening up. She's going outside. She's eating not her tomato soup.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that's going to have a rippling effect as we see Leanne loosen up a little bit. Like, what are going to be sort of the consequences of her letting her
guard down?
Yes. But yeah, it's very much a show for the senses, which I think is amazing. I mean, there's just such an intricacy to the way that they do this show, from the way that they shoot it to the way that they present, certain imagery. It's absolutely incredible. But I love that you guys brought up the food with the homeless kids, because we get a sense of who Sean was before his life with Dorothy. And he talks about he was somebody who was living on the street. And it's interesting to me because I think, there's a lot of people who food has saved. If you read a lot of stories about like certain, well-known chefs and stuff, like for a lot of them, they were in a really bad place until they sort of connected with food. And I kind of love that we're getting these little developments with Sean, like beyond the relationship he has with Dorothy. I just think there's some really nice things there. And I like that he gets his little moment in the spotlight, even though Dorothy's using it for a story.
Well, it's interesting too, because he's like this, like, I don't know like how popular he is, like in terms of like the real like outside world or whatever, but he's a chef. And so like, part of chefs are experimenting, and it's kind of nice that he can sit there and say like, let me experiment with people that don't get an opportunity to try. Like that can't be snobby to me. So either I open up their eyes to something new to say like, here, try this without any like real judgment. Or if the judgment's coming back to him, then the judgment feels like, well, it's from people that don't have like the sophisticated palate that they've grown to. And they've only grown accustomed to like the cheese pepperonis, the cheese pizzas, the pepperoni pizzas, the hamburger pizzas, like the basic stuff, not the exotic stuff. So it lets them experiment without feeling judged on some end. Or if they do judge him, it's not like this, like, oh gosh, it's like I'm Wolfgang Puck and Jonathan Gold is judging me based on like this new pizza that I'm trying. Or maybe it's just like that whole satisfaction of, let me give you something that you've never tried before. And just seeing like their own reactions to first, like being like, it's like a kid. It's like a little kid. It's like, ew, I don't want that. And then they taste it. It's like, oh my gosh, this is great. In this case, they kind of went back to being adults and kind of being like, I don't know about, it's like the dandelion soup thing. It still doesn't sound appetizing to me. I'm like, dandelion's a weed.
Well, the way he made it look, though, it looked pretty yummy to me. So yeah.
I used to
be pizza. I'll eat it.
I used to be opposed to squash soup, but the one time you have it, it just happens to be made the right way. Like, you're suddenly like, oh, this is actually pretty good. But it's funny you mentioned that, because like there's a scene when when Dorothy decides to turn this into a story about Sean, when he's bringing them the sandwiches and he's talking about this perfectly aged cheddar, and like these kids don't care about those kind of intricacies. Like they're just happy somebody's giving them some food. Right. But I think what's really kind of remarkable about all this is when you think about like when people, like if you donate to food banks or things like that, or you work in like a food kitchen, it's never like great food. You know what I mean? It's kind of like what's left over in the pantry, the real basics. And I kind of love that. Just for me, because like I grew up with a single mom, and like there was a few times in my childhood where we had to go to like a food bank and basically get like a box of food. And it's, here's your, generic Rice Krispies and very basic stuff. Like you couldn't even get Chef Boyardee. It was like, the store version of ravioli or something.
Right.
And
like SpaghettiOs or something like that.
Yeah.
Like the title's like, it's got this like really funky title, like, but right.
Yeah. And I was like, I just thought to myself, like, this isn't a guy who is trying to shortchange these kids to make himself feel better. He's really trying to do something that's selfless for him.
Yeah.
And I think it plays into something we're going to see in a later episode in terms of what Sean has sort of been doing for himself in the wake of everything that's happened in the last few seasons. But I just really liked that. I really liked that we're sort of getting a sense of him. And I also just love, there's the scene when they're getting ready to go to the park and he's looking for Jericho's sunglasses and he's like, he's so giddy over how tiny and cute they are. And it was just like those little tiny things that they do in this show. And I'm just like, it feels so lived in and so real. We're like, I would be the same way to be like, oh, look at these tiny sunglasses. Like it's just a really interesting thing that like, I don't think a lot of shows take the time to do those tiny little character beats. But we get a lot of really good ones here.
Right. Well, you're talking about also his how he identifies himself through food. You know, it's like feeding Jericho, and that was the first episode of the season where he was feeding Jericho for the first time with something that he made, you know, and how excited he was for his son to taste, you know, his food. It really is a part of who he is. And I really, like you said, I really felt that this episode sort of, you know, highlighted that even more so than it has in the past. And the idea that he can share this with the other people besides his own family, you know. So I thought it was really cool.
And it's trying to show the evolution of Sean bonding with this baby, whereas like, you know, because in season 1 is like, whose baby is this? And then season 2 it disappears. And then now you've got season 3. It's kind of like really accepting, like, no, this really is my son. I'm going to bond with this baby. I'm going to stop thinking about where Leanne got this baby from or where this baby is. And so like, it's like the evolution of that too. Whereas as we saw, you know, Julian's still the one that's like, dude, there's something not right here. You know, it's like, I don't care if a baby's here. Whose baby is this? It's like, I don't want to bond with this baby.
I know. Also, I really think he wants his sister to be better at, you know, to get over this psychosis. You know what I mean? I think he really wants her to finally realize and say out loud what actually happened. You know, I think he's always been that character. He's always been that person trying to get her to, you know, to wake up, basically, to try to be not crazy, living in La La Land or whatever it is that she lives in. And to be honest with you, I think you know, Dorothy is a great character, but she does bug me. She just bugs me sometimes. I just want to slap her because, you know, she's just, you know, I just want her to. I am like Julian. I think that's really what I'm trying to say here. I'm Julian all the way. I want her to really realize what's going on. You know, I don't know.
No, I totally agree.
Like this. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I really feel like you mentioned that. I feel like Julian really is the audience at this point, especially in this season. And, you know, he's trying, you know, as much as we're trying to push the story along by watching these episodes, he's trying to move the story along by how his involvement is with this, where he wants Dorothy to be better. He wants to know the mysteries of Jericho. He's trying to figure out exactly what Leanne is doing, and what her end game is here. But I'm curious for both of you, because we get sort of those flashes of Julian with the crib, and then we get the flashes of him holding Dorothy. And are these flashbacks or are these images from the future? Like, I know him looking in the crib is a flashback, but like, is this also going to be the future? Is this where we're heading? Like, is this sort of the first inkling of like, things are going to be horrifically devastating by the time this is all done? And I think that's the thing that I like about Julian, and I especially liked about his character in this, is that, you know, everybody's happy and everybody's kind of falling into their rhythms, but this isn't right. It still isn't right. We love watching it, but we know there's something wrong, and we don't know where it's going to go. And I think Julian for us is like that sort of vessel to kind of show us that, like, okay, you know, we can enjoy what we're doing right now, but I think there are some really bad things coming.
Exactly. It's this foreboding. That's what I feel like, for especially in this season, more so than any of the other ones, is this foreboding, this like, when is it all gonna, you know, sort of start to crumble down? Because Leanne is just so paranoid, and like every person that you see, she sees, and we're like, is that a person, a cult person? And, you know, it's what does his back look like? It's like, you know, we're also trying to figure it out. And of course, the end of the episode, I had a feeling that those homeless kids weren't necessarily as harmless as they seemed, basically. So,
but then you also wonder, like, well, what exactly are they?
Yeah, like, and she could also have been fantasizing that they were doing that too.
Right, like at that very end. Right, is it her? Like, you know, is it just her, just kind of like putting her images in her head of like,
Right.
that's what, or is it what, or they think they're really there and like they're the outside force that she's worried about.
Right.
Or in another way to sort of open it up is Leanne manipulating them, because we've seen her manipulate things before. And for me, what I loved about that final shot is one of my favorite sort of underappreciated movies from John Carpenter is Prince of Darkness.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that shot has a very Prince of Darkness vibe.
Oh no, like it's the actor. I can't Jameson Parker or something, like I can't. But I know the movie. I know like the exact movie that you're talking about.
Yeah. But it's like that's like that whole movie where they keep looking outside the church and there's just the people standing there because they're being held there by some force.
Right.
So is it Leanne? Is it something else? Like, what is going on? And I think that's interesting. But I will say, Sean letting them into the house to me is like the stupidest thing. I don't care if it's my neighbor in my building that I've been living next door to for 10 years. I'm still not letting them in my house. Like, and I feel bad because I get he's got this heart and he wants to be there for these kids. But ultimately, like, Leanne and Dorothy are both not wrong in that scenario. Like, you have a child, you don't know what these kids are doing. There's something strange. You're just going to let them into the house? Like, that to me was like a really stupid move.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. And he, they keep talking about protecting Leanne and, and making sure she's okay. And yet he just completely, doesn't listen to that, or he never follows what he says he's going to do, like he's put her, let's just go outside. And, he's done a lot of things like that. He's just not, he just doesn't seem to care that much about what Leanne's feeling or doing because he just wants to, live his life kind of thing. I think that's kind of how he's looking at it. While Dorothy seems to be much more protective, you know.
Do you feel, because like we've seen in the last couple episodes, if there's sort of this confrontation of Julian in terms of his relationship with Leanne, but he's in her room and there's that little note where he smells her pillow. Do you think he's over her? Do you think there's a part of him that still is drawn to her? I'm just curious what you guys think about that, because it's he's with Vera, everything's great, they're fantastic together, I love them, but he smells her pillow, and that to me is a little weird. It's a little strange when you're he was poking around.
He was trying to obviously he was trying to cover what he was looking for in her room and kissing her and whatnot, but that kiss looked pretty good. So yeah, I think he still has feelings for her for sure. He's drawn to her in a weird way,
she's
sort of like we all are.
she's the temptress, she's Eve, there's something that's evil and strange or like whatever, but clearly like he had an attraction before, and you don't just kind of just shut that off, other than him like, probably telling him like, well, I've gone to rehab, so like I need to kind of rehabilitate my like he talked about it in like in episode 1, it's like I got this paunch, it's like I'm too old for you, like trying to talk himself out of everything of why their relationship doesn't work. But it doesn't mean that their relationship completely doesn't work. It's just him telling himself like, no, like I think this is inappropriate, so I'm just going to say that it's inappropriate, we need to cut it off. But it doesn't mean that like the attraction that he has inside doesn't still exist.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of that speech was more for him than it was for her. Yeah. And I think he's kind of kidding himself. But yeah, it seems like everybody, Leanne is this magnet, and we're going to see it more and more, especially I think it's next week's episode, the next 2 episodes, we're going to see that kind of playing a little bit more with some other characters. But I'm curious because we saw the return of Roscoe. And I think for me, he had one of the best scenes, I think, in the entirety of season 2, when they do the hypnosis on him and he just falls apart, and you kind of still feel the fallout of that. That look that he gives Leanne when she walks in, and then Julian looks away and he looks back and Roscoe's gone.
Right.
And I'm curious to see if that's going to play out as well, because, again, he's a guy who's sort of found himself in the middle of all this stuff inadvertently, which he thought was just sort of a simple do some investigation, and then he's like goes missing, encounters weird cult people. He knows something's up with Leanne, but he still can't quite put his finger on it. But we also, again, in this episode, get a sense that something else is going on with his family, because he's calling Julian from the hospital, which I think is going to sort of play out as we get further into this season. But I was really happy to see, I wrote his name down because I completely forgot, Philip James Brannon I think he's one of my favorite sort of secondary players in this because
Yeah.
he's really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I guess he really hasn't tapped into what happened to him. And that's probably what's going to come out at some point in time. It's just going to come flooding back, and then he'll be able to maybe shed some light on what's going on with Leanne and what these people really are and how they, are they supernatural or not, or whatever the case may be. And I feel like he'll be the one that the floodgates will open, maybe.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the same time too. It's like Julian kind of needs somebody on his side,
Right?
like someone that actually experienced, the when Leanne first got there. Like Vera Sunitha, like that's like a post like I went to rehab, and she's just entering the picture, and
Right.
and she, like we learned from a couple episodes ago too that she's learning about this whole thing. Whereas like Roscoe, like he's kind of been on the journey and he's still there, and like he's not disguised by the baby's back or the baby's gone or let's make sure that Dorothy's happy. He's like he's been there the whole time to be like there's something strange afoot with this woman and this house and this baby, and it's not solved. So, and something weird happened to me too. That I've experienced. So like I need answers.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say with the opening of the episode, because we have the scene where like Julian's having these flashes and then they're in the him and Vera in the car, and Sunitha talks about, essentially we get a little bit of her backstory where she's talking about how she had to give up a baby at a certain point.
Right.
And again, it's like one of these things where like, I don't know how, like, I want to hug all these writers because they work in all of this stuff, these little touchstones in such a way that like, it gives you such a sense of who these people are, but it's like 5 seconds of dialogue. And she's like, and my mom didn't said, don't hold the baby, and that's what helped me cope. And you're like, wow, you just had this discussion about something really personal and something that a lot of people don't really talk about if they've been through it. We don't talk about like people very often. We don't give them the space to talk about like having to give up babies or going through abortion or miscarriage or things like that. Those are still sort of taboo. And I love the way that they open the episode with that, which is like pretty bold, I think.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you kind of get wrapped up into the whole mystery of everything and, and trying to figure out the puzzle. But at the same time, it is still it's a character driven drama, and a family drama. And I feel like like you said, all those little droplets that they put in there, it just kind of enhances it all together. And you kind of, sometimes you have to really pay attention for a second and listen to what they're saying to, to get the fullness of it. Cause you're still kind of like, who is Leah? Where's the baby? And all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's good. It's very well written.
Yeah. Kid, I know how you sort of were saying how you were kind of frustrated with Dorothy. But I will say like, I kind of really love her in this season. And I think we're getting a sense of who she is, like beyond sort of that facade that she's had to put up over the last few seasons, because we see her struggling at work, and Dorothy doesn't seem like a person who struggles very often.
Right.
She's got the handsome husband who's an amazing chef. They live in this really nice, affluent neighborhood. She has her baby back. She has a career, on television. Like on the surface, she has everything, but at work, she's sort of being kind of manipulated and demoted a little bit, not given the good stuff. And I sort of love that they toy with that because, I've been in this realm myself now for 15 years, and I've worked really hard and things like that. But I see, younger people coming into the fold and kind of going right ahead of me in line and things like that. And I get her frustrations.
Yeah.
That's
true. I do this, particularly in this last episode, you do see, how she is starting to struggle with work. Because when we first see her, she seems to be really on top of everything, even though she's scared, even though she's completely gone bonkers and she thinks this toy baby is her baby. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, still work was always very important to her and who she was. And yeah, the fact that it's starting to slide a little bit, you do feel sorry for her.
Well, there's also like identity shift too. I think, like, cause she's probably like in her heyday before Jericho ever showed up. She probably was like this, like A type that was just like the go-getter and everything. And then now it's like, I have to really balance between being a mother and also the profession aspect of it. And, and we see like the struggles of her in episode 2 with, like, I got to get Jericho into this school. I've got to do all these things. So like, there's a little bit of distraction to, for her to like, and that's why like the work struggle could be happening. Maybe not, but it's also a very human thing to happen. When you have to balance, like when you start balancing, like more than just thinking about yourself, you have someone else to be thinking about and, their needs and everything else. And like, yeah, she's got the baby back. And although this baby, cries a lot in the, on screen or whatever, because he's a baby or whatever. But like, that's what I'm saying though, too. It's just like the balance is different. The motivations are different, like, just like, I can't be selfish anymore, or as much as I'm trying to be selfish and on top of things, like I have to think about this other human being in my life on top of like being a wife as well and sister and, and having this weird secondary nanny mother too. That's like paranoid about everything. Like I would guess the way I'd look at it, I'd say like a lot of there's more distraction to a certain degree. Whereas before I think she probably had like a straight focus.
Yeah. I will say it's funny because when they talk about her having to go cover like the pet fashion show, and the other night I was just having like a really bad night. It was like, so it was really late and I was working and my other half was like, let's put on Anchorman because it's like one of her favorites.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say Anchorman, yeah.
And it totally reminded me of Veronica when she has to go do the cat fashion show where she's like, curiosity did not kill, fashion curiosity did not kill the kitten today or something. And I was just like, can you just imagine like being somebody who's like so good at your job, but your job is like, go cover a pet fashion show. I get it. Like, because there's been times where I've had to cover things or do things, and I'm just like, oh, this isn't what I want to be doing, but I'm going to do it because it's part of the gig. Yeah. So those frustrations, I think, are really real. And I like that we're sort of humanizing Dorothy a little bit more because I think, again, the first 2 seasons, we were sort of kept at arm's length from her because of the disconnect that she was having from reality.
Right.
And now we're getting a sense of, her the real struggles that she's facing because they've shifted. But yeah, I was like, who wants to cover a pet fashion show? Like, I'm good at my job, but I don't know that I could sell that on TV. Like, I don't know if I'm that good. So,
well, especially
I love the Marilyn Monroe look though. She looked great.
Oh, she's fantastic as a blonde.
Yeah, she looks like she's a great Marilyn Monroe with like, it's like, if you look at her, because like Lauren Ambrose, like I've always known her with, red hair, ginger, as a ginger on some end. So like all of a sudden it's like platinum blonde. It's like, oh yeah, all right, there we go.
Yep.
she
wore that dress. It was true. Which is funny because she's probably like a size 4 and they make her sound like she's like all curvy and stuff. And I'm like, she looks like she weighs like 103 pounds soaking wet. And I love how they're like, you're kind of curvy. And I was like, oh my God, then like, am I like the whole geometric shape spectrum? Like, I don't get it. So I'm just like, oh, I know. God. So
I know.
But I'm really warming up to her in ways I wasn't expecting in this season, which I really like.
Yeah, maybe I mean, you're right. I guess maybe I'm sort of having still the residuals from because
and I get it. I totally get it because like you want her to have, because she is so smart and you care about her, you want her to have that moment where she reckons with this. I totally get that. So I get what you're saying there. Yeah. But I think they've done a great job while they sort of toy with this idea because it's like this is the second episode in a row where we get really close to Dorothy having that breakthrough moment.
Right.
And you could see it. You could see it the way the Lauren Ambrose plays it in those scenes where the wheels are turning but there's just something that stops her, and in this case, it's, the other mother coming over for her diaper bag.
And the hair.
And her brush, which we find out that, Julian, through all of his efforts to try to get the DNA tested, did not work.
And then his kind of look is like, all right, so now I'm back to square one. And who is this kid? Is he her kid? And you're like, okay, so what's he gonna try to do next to try to see what the situation is? So yeah, I mean the shoe dropping thing is just what's keeping me glued. I'm like, what? I just want to see what's gonna happen and when these cult people are gonna show up or what the heck's gonna happen.
Well, my thing is, I guess we're watching the episode and we're seeing Julian go through everything, going at lengths to get the hair, like pulling the baby's hair and then like trying to like seduce Leanne a little bit and having that backfire. Did you really think that by the end of this episode that he was gonna get some real answer versus the other mom coming in being like, oh, I left my brush.
Oh,
That's the thing, is
definitely
like the
not.
lead up to it, because like it just, you know, like there's a little
Yeah,
bit
I
of
guess
comedy in that. You know, it's
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
it's almost like
It's like a farce.
it's almost like Inspector Clouseau, Pink Panther type, you know, stuff that's going on with him doing everything. So like, do you think, you know, like, is it, as you're watching it, you know, like to get to the end of it, did you really think like, oh, he's gonna get some version of an answer of whether or not, okay, it's Dorothy's, or like he's really Dorothy's kid, it's like dude unidentified, or is it, you know, it's Leanne's, and it's completely like none of those two things. So that was like an interesting thing to bring in, to be like, yeah, that's a logical thing that, you know, a person would do.
Right. Yeah. It's true.
Big violation, but
yeah. And I like that she very much just very calmly was just like, you have crossed the line and you better not do that again.
Right.
So like, where does that leave Julian? Like, how does he go forward with, you know, trying to put this together, but ultimately also, you know, not wanting to break the trust between him and his sister, you know, and screwing that up.
Right.
Because that's sort of a fine line he has to walk. But I will say, like, we've always, you know, we had a lot of episodes with Julian throughout the first couple of seasons, but I like that this one was really from his point of view, because I feel like it just amplified things a little bit more with all the rest of the characters. But yeah, it's one of those where I'm like, every episode, I'm like, I always feel like I'm getting closer to getting the, you know, I'm like, oh, I found a couple more puzzle pieces. And then by the end of the episode, I'm like, oh no, these don't go here. These are the totally wrong pieces. And you start over from scratch. So, but it's never in a way that frustrates me either. You know, I'm still totally enthralled.
It's the puzzle pieces that you're trying to make fit with the corner. You're like, no, I swear this works with the corner, right? But it kind of fits, but it's like doesn't.
Shit.
Yeah, right.
Like, I'm gonna make it fit.
Yeah, it's like the Rubik's Cube. You get like the one flat side that's all color. You're like, great. You're like, wait a minute, everything else doesn't look right.
It's still like 7 other sides you have to figure out, and you're like,
right?
Oh gosh.
Okay, I want to ask you guys real quick, because I wasn't on the last 2 podcasts, but what is the bee or bug or whatever that thing that is inside the wall? What did you guys talk about that? Is that a person? Is that just a jumble of bees, or what is that?
Oh,
what did you guys?
I'm totally blanking on her name. I'm going to my
Aunt Josephine, right?
Yeah, Josephine. That's Aunt Josephine's body.
That's what happened, or at least, okay. Like, I mean, let's, you know, if we just get an outside perspective, that's probably what happened to her body as we closed on season 2.
Okay.
And
I
then
thought they put her in
like,
that sinkhole thing. That's what I thought they did, but no, they didn't. Okay, I was a little confused about that.
It almost feels like the house has a sickness to it too.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
which is really an interesting thing to sort of play up on, where it just seems like it's just everything is wrong in this house. Like, you almost just want to tell them, like, you need to move, get out of the city, just go somewhere, start over in a new house. Like, just go to place.
Go to the beach again. I mean, that was like, I loved that scene too, where they're talking on the FaceTime. I thought that was very cool. And what was that? I think that was the second or first episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, though, it is a twisted house. I mean, okay, so the baby dies in the house. Yeah, it has like that weird sinkhole in it. And then there's a robbery in the house. It's almost like, you know, when someone has a car, and don't wish this upon anybody, and it sucks. It hasn't happened to me yet, thank God. But like when you get your car stolen, and like they're actually able to return your car. I never know a single person that like wants to keep the car because they feel so violated. So it's kind of like the house too.
Yeah, I had my car broken into like shortly after I moved to LA. And it felt weird. Like, it felt weird to know that somebody was in there. And it was like, there was nothing of value in there. They took a pair of high heel shoes, which I was a little bummed about because they were like my favorites. And then they ate a pack of Pop-Tarts that I kept in there for emergencies when I'd have to drive. I didn't have time for breakfast. So it was obviously somebody who needed a pack of Pop-Tarts. But I was like, they didn't get anything.
Yeah, they're hungry.
Yeah, it was just weird. But it was like sitting in there afterwards. And I was just like, I don't know what they've done in here. Like, it feels strange. It does. There is a violation. Like, once something comes into your safe space, like, how do you regain that sense of safety back?
Yeah.
For some people, you don't. And in this case, I just don't think whatever's there in that house is going to leave anytime soon.
Yeah, you got the uncle, you got the aunt coming in. I mean, that's the whole thing is like this. Yeah, exactly. And the house is always this weird character. It's like, still don't know how many rooms actually exist in this house, how many floors, you know, because it's like, you know, like I always fail to like, I never have enough time to actually ask them and say, dude, what does this house actually look like? Because I'm so busy asking other questions, you know, or whatever. I guess I have to go sleuthing a little bit more, but yeah, like the house is like this like weird kind of cursed. Is it? Yeah, maybe if they moved to like some other house would be like they'd be good, you know, just be like they'd be all happy again.
Maybe it's kind of like The Shining, where like, you know, like Kubrick kept changing the layout of the hotel the further you get into that movie. Like maybe they're doing the same thing here. Did we just have a breakthrough? Because now I'm thinking about this, because it does feel like there's always like at the top of the stairs and you always look to the right and there's the baby's room. But I feel like sometimes you look down that way and sometimes Leanne's room is there.
Right.
So now it's like I have to go back and watch this show for like the fourth time or something just so I can start getting a sense of the geography. But it's interesting because like when you do a lot of horror stuff, one of like the directives that most, you know, filmmakers or storytellers will do is they give you the lay of the land. Right. They basically set the stage like this is, you know, your first floor, your second floor. And they're constantly twisting with you in this. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is sort of the fact that they kind of keep shifting the inside of this house and what our perceptions of it is, if it isn't sort of a nod to Kubrick.
Yeah. You know, and Heather, we talked about this too, you know, with the other mom that was in last week's episode where she's upstairs, like I'm trying to nurse the baby or change the baby or whatever too. You know, it's like, hey, like if I went to that house, I know where the living room is. I know where the kitchen is. I don't know where the bathroom is in that house. I mean, I might go up the stairs, you know,
I would have found some random bedroom. Yeah. I would have found some random bedroom.
Just because the house is so mysterious. So
yeah. So there's so many mysteries and we're going to get into so many more because we've got how many more episodes? 7 more episodes to go for this season. But yeah, I think this was great. I'm really excited. I will say, because most of us, we've seen through episode 5. For me, episode 5 is like my favorite of the season so far. So I'm excited that we're going to get to dive into that very soon. But I just think we've tapped into some really interesting things now. That I hadn't really thought about. So I always love these episodes because it's like I come in it with sort of my ideas, and by the time I leave, I'm like, oh, that is a good point. And so it's like I have to keep it in the back burner when we kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it's that thing too, where because the show's only 30 minutes, it's like you want that, you want an hour. You're like, wait, I want the hour's worth, but there's only 30 minutes. So you're like, oh, I guess I got to tune in next week. You know, it keeps you there. Whereas like these days we're so spoiled with binging that sometimes it doesn't do it. But this one is just that one where it's like, please give me an hour. Please give me an hour and 30 minutes.
Show, this show and What We Do in the Shadows are my 2 shows where I'm like, you could easily do an hour for each episode and I would have 0 complaints. Or the standard 44 minutes because they like to pretend that there's commercials on streaming, even though there's not. But, you know, give me the 44 minutes. Like, I need just a little bit more. So I haven't looked to see like if maybe the season finale is going to be a little bit longer, but I'm hoping because the 30 minutes just flies by and you're like, where did that all go? So, but yeah, no, I think we've dove in. Like we almost need at this point to do like the Charlie Day meme where like we're going to have to put up like a board with strings and like all the little theories and the conspiracies and the ideas, because
and Heather, I know that we keep having guests come in like Kit and everything too. So it's just like getting everybody's other ideas of like what they think or questions to say like, oh yeah, well this is how we thought about that episode or this or that, you know.
It's fun though.
So this is great. This is great to be a part of. I'm so excited. I guess I'm coming in a couple more episodes, so I'm gonna I'll make sure to keep watching this though, so I can be up to date with you guys and
Yeah, no, I almost feel like we have to bring everybody back for the finale at this point.
Yeah, I think we should all
like,
do it.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Like we all have to
have all of us together. Yeah,
because I feel like
actually like that idea.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make that suggestion. But yeah, I think especially once we get to that, I think that we're all like, because we've all had these different discussions. Like I'm just like, I want to see how they come together. So
yeah, me too.
Yeah, the HCA will send us like $4 chuck. I don't know if is it $4. I don't know. Instead of $2 chuck, they'll send us some $4 chuck. We go drink wine together.
100% down with that.
I think it's $4 chuck. Maybe it's $3 chuck. I don't know.
Wonderful, guys. Well, thank you so much for chatting today. Let's go ahead and let everybody know where they can find you. Rick, where can people find you online?
On all social media at Rick Hong and HollywoodFirstLook.com. And soon there'll be in some interviews with Moonfall that's coming out tomorrow, February 4th. So you'll see me some interviews with Patrick Wilson and Halle Berry and Roland Emmerich.
Excellent. How about for you, Kit?
Well, I'm a little bit in flux right now, but I am an editor for screenpics.com. And then also you can find me at The Movie Kit, but probably going to be sort of dusting off my old site, themoviekit.com. So look for that pretty soon.
Awesome.
Excellent. And I am Heather Wixson. You can find me over at dailydead.com. Sometimes I pop up over at fangoria.com. And you can find me on Twitter over at The Horror Check. And we appreciate you all for tuning in this week. Please come back next week so we can dive into some more mysteries and conspiracies and all sorts of fun stuff. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.